Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and my goal is to help military veterans thrive in their civilian career. Today's episode number 239 with George Randle back for a second episode. Well, George joined me on episode 222, and I enjoyed our conversation so much, I wanted to have him back on the show as soon as possible for a deeper dive. George is also an advisor for EF Overwatch, a company that you're going to hear more about from its founder in episode number 246. In this interview, we answer questions submitted by the Beyond the Uniform community. We talk about how compensation is not just about salary. We talk about a specific timeline to use in your job transition and job search. And we talk about how to structure your resume and what role cover letters play in the entire interviewing process. As always, at beyondtheinform.io, you'll find show notes with the text transcript of this episode, as well as links to every resource we discuss. And you can also find out about Beyond the Uniform's coaching program. One of the things that comes through in this interview is the importance of self-knowledge as you look to your next career move. The Beyond the Uniform coaching program is designed to connect you with subsidized, professional, certified coaches to help you figure out more about yourself and what you should do next. So with that, let's dive into my conversation with George. Well, joining me again today for a second time on the show in Austin, Texas is George Randle. George, welcome back.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. First time was a blast, so hopefully we get some good info out there this time.
Awesome. And for listeners, if you haven't listened to episode number 222, it is a must listen. It is a conversation which George and I talked about common mistakes veterans make in transitioning their civilian career, how to break down the job that you did in the military when talking to someone on an interview, about recruiting. We talked about all sorts of topics, and we didn't have enough time to even scratch the surface of George's knowledge. And so I'm excited to have him back on the show. And I wanted to start with, we had 3 different people submit questions to us, and so I want to start with those, and then we're going to dive into the areas we thought would be most fruitful for our discussion. So first of all, let's start with Chief Warrant Officer 4 David Lewis in the Army asks, I am finding many jobs that I would like to apply to, but I'm still 6 months out from the date of my terminal leave. Should I apply so they know that I'm interested, or wait until I'm closer to my terminal leave date?
Well, generally, it depends upon the nature and the type and the level of position because there's so many variables. But the way right now, it's a candidate's market, meaning the unemployment is dropping. So people move on talent much, much faster currently, and I expect that to continue well into 2019. So my advice would be, that you look when you're probably 45, 50 days out, you can start applying to those positions because it gives you, I would say 60 is the outside. It gives you time to get through any interviewing processes, any screening, anything like that. And then, any other civilian would be allowed to give 2-3 weeks notice and then come on board. So the timing's right. I think 90 is just a little bit too far.
Awesome. And David also asked, I'm seeing jobs that I would like to apply to, but I'm unaware of the salary for that position. Is there a way to find out what a job pays without wasting both the applicant's time and the organization's time if the desired salary is not in the ballpark?
The number one, there's a couple sources out there, but generally Glassdoor is kind of your best bet because the way that Glassdoor works is that if you write a review on there, you're allowed to write one as an employee over the course of a year. You're allowed to write one as a interviewee if you've gone through the hiring process. So you're allowed to put like 3 postings up there as an individual. So you'll see a lot of people who've gone through the interview process, and they'll generally do their best to aggregate salary information that they find from multiple sources and people that post there. So Glassdoor is usually the best place to start. But remind you, if there's a job that you're interested in, I would highly encourage you to apply even when you don't know the compensation. And by the way, I use the term compensation instead of salary because it's important as people transition into the civilian world The compensation is made up of multiple factors. You have a base salary. There's generally a bonus program. There might be a 401k matching. In the tech space and other companies, there might even be equity or profit sharing. So your total compensation package will have multiple parts to it. But if you see a job, you like that job, you believe that you're well qualified, I would absolutely apply. Never self-select out of something.
I like that. I like that thought. Glassdoor is a great resource. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And I like that thought too. Of it's just better to be able to say no to things. It's good to have options, and if it works out that it's not the right salary, you can always turn that down. But it's better to have some options. It sounds like.
Yeah, the chief there said, about wasting anybody's time. Very polite, very thoughtful way to put that. But generally, if you get into that discussion, at some point within the 30, 40 minutes, recruiters are going to figure that out if this is a match, as well as the applicant's going to figure that out. So that's just part of the process. So you're not really wasting a recruiter's time. I wouldn't worry about it. And it's like I say, if it turns out to be not what you thought, it's easy to say, I apologize. The compensation level I thought would be more significant, so I know that I wouldn't be a match. But if you have other opportunities at this level, I would welcome being considered. So at least, you're discussing that. So it's never going to be a waste of anybody's time. It will be time well spent.
Awesome. I also had a lieutenant commander in the Navy write in and asked, how would George advise military cybersecurity practitioners to better explore and prepare for transitioning to a second career in civilian cybersecurity in 5 or more years? Specifically, what and how to better grow cyber/non-cyber skills, and what to read and study to stay current on, and how to better research long-term, quote, crown jewel opportunities.
Well, I'm not sure how one defines crown jewel, but I'll just take that as, what would be an ideal job or cutting edge job for commander there. I would tell you in this information age, what's great about, where we find ourselves is there's just so much information out there, and companies, as part of their marketing strategies, they put a ton of great knowledge out there about what they're doing. At Forcepoint, we have a couple, PhDs, doctors that are on the speaking circuit, and they write blogs, they write white papers, they give seminars, they give speeches. And even just going to our career site, going to our main web page, you'll see where we're going and what we're doing. Likewise with some of our top competitors that are out there. And I try to be very agnostic. I know that I support one company, but I'm very agnostic. We do have some very good competitors out there. But you can go to each one of their company pages. You can go to LinkedIn. You can follow them. And so you'll get information actually pushed to you about what we're doing in the cybersecurity industry. Right now the trend is to converge platforms, meaning bringing everything together, because security is multifaceted. And for those listeners out there, most people think of cybersecurity in the most basic form, like a basic firewall. We're into next generation firewalls. We're into dynamic data protection. And how you learn about those things is finding the top companies in those space, following some of their key thought leaders, and following their pages. You'll actually get an enormous amount of information. Now, when it comes to the cutting edge or maybe new products that are coming out, you'll hear topically what we're doing or where we're headed or what we're thinking about, but certainly you'll never get into any company's secret sauce just on the web page. But for your basic knowledge that would help you start thinking about that career, the companies just publish volumes and volumes of information about it. So you'll have more reading than you know what to do with.
Awesome. So let's dive into some more broad questions. And the first thing I was curious to know about, and I do hear this a lot from people, is how, David's question kind of alluded to this, but it's how soon should I begin my job search?
So I'm going to kind of back up on this question a little bit, because I think there's two parts to it. The right question should be, when should I begin my preparation for the search? Because one of the things that I find is a top mistake for military people is they think that the job search and the preparation are kind of one and the same, and they start them at the same time. So the first thing is ideally, 18 months, a year, when you know that your enlistment or your time of service is coming to an end, or you've decided to make the decision to retire, or you're ready to do something else. I think at least a year out, you should begin the preparation, researching different industries, researching companies, looking through jobs pages to find out what interests you, what's relatable to your field, to your interests. Start getting interviewing books, start the basics of drafting a resume, start doing the skills inventory and the personal reflection that says, okay, this is what makes me a great leader, great project manager, and start learning about yourself and the best things about yourself that help you relate to industry. That should begin about a year out. And that's a long, long discussion I think we can have on the proper way to prepare. As to actually when you should begin your search, and as part of that question earlier, I would tell people to start looking about 4 to 5 months, looking through jobs. And as I mentioned, it's just, I don't think people truly understand how much information is out there. But whether you go to LinkedIn, Indeed, Dice, Clear Jobs, any number of job posting places, you can set up alerts for things that you're interested in, locations, companies, or whatever, and have that feed sent to you every time they have a new job. So, 4 to 5, 6 months out, you can start looking at those jobs. But the actual app applying to those jobs, like I said, is about 45 to 50 days out. Then you can start applying to positions. And to follow up from our first call, I always advise people that you have to have those alerts and you have to apply when the job is posted. If that job has been posted 3, 5, 7 days, you can fire in your resume or your application, but please don't put any energy behind it, because people can move very, very fast to apply to positions. So you set up those alerts about 5 to 6 months out when you know what you're dialed in a little bit more on your target, 45 to 50 days out, then start applying.
And just to make sure I wrote those down right, you said Indeed, Dice, Clear Jobs. Were those the 3 you mentioned?
Yeah, there's Monster, Career Builder, and there's all kinds of new job aggregators out there. And what an aggregator does generally, and LinkedIn's kind of one, Indeed is one, but they scrape a lot of different job sites. Like we will, we work with Indeed, we work with LinkedIn. LinkedIn, we are allowed to post our jobs, directly every time we get a job. It's a process for the recruiter to take that position and post it from our careers page onto LinkedIn and spread it out. Things like Indeed are really, covering the market, where they will go to their client companies and scrape all of those jobs and automatically post them. So the minute a recruiter puts them out there, Indeed will aggregate all the things you have and immediately post them out to their site. So yeah, it's and there's a few others. I mean, you'll find things for your state, for the federal government. I mean, USA Jobs or whatever they're titling it now for federal jobs. By the way, I do want to throw a caveat in there. If you're pursuing some federal job, I'm only speaking to the civilian world, industry. Government jobs have a whole different set of rules and application time. So that probably starts a whole lot earlier.
Great. And then could you talk about the different types of resumes there are and which one you would recommend or recommend that they consider using?
Yeah, so I've had, there are thousands of opinions on what the right resume is, but they really break down into 2 categories. There's a chronological, meaning a time-based, that from your name, right below your name and your personal information, there's your education, and it jumps right into your last job, your last bit of employment with a job description, a few achievements under that, then the job you had before that, the job you had before that, et cetera. All the way down at the bottom of the page, possibly certifications, qualifications, awards, civic groups, or volunteer activity that you do. But it really just shows, an employer, recruiter, what you've done, from when you graduated high school or when you graduated college to the current day right before you joined them. It's just simply time stamped. A functional resume is more about your skills and your competencies and your achievements. And there really isn't a best one, but this is how I think about them in the most basic terms. I've been out in the professional world, and I won't give away my age, but for a number of decades. And so at my level, for the positions that I'm applying to, a chronological resume would be an eyesore for any recruiter or any firm that were looking at me. But at my level, the functional skills where I've had 10, 15, 20 years of experience in a particular area, you're putting up the competencies, the areas, like if you're a project management professional, if you're an architect, a software architect, if you're any kind of engineer, all of the things that you've done that are functional and applicable to that space, whether it be computer science, information technology, engineering, civil service, and you're listing your skills, competencies, tools, experiences or major projects that you've worked on, and then possibly a list of achievements. And then maybe on page 2, you're showing, okay, these are the 5 companies that I've worked for. But where you've worked and how long you worked there is not near as important as your functional skills. If you're just transitioning and you have probably 5 to 10, 15 years of military service or less, a chronological resume is fine. A functional resume can be a little bit better when you get into keywords. If you have technical skills, project management skills, program management skills, software, coding, accounting, finance, specific logistics skills or logistics certifications, then a functional resume, might suit you better. So when recruiters are searching, they're pulling up keywords. Whereas a chronological resume for most people getting out of the military based on demographics is absolutely fine. Personally, I have both. And so it depends on what I'm going to apply to. One may be better than the other. So I always prepare both.
Yeah, I have much less experience on this, but I remember with when I was applying to consulting firms out of business school, the thing I liked about the functional resume, it was a way to demonstrate I understood what they were hiring for. So I forget the areas, but it was, let's just say, leadership, analysis, and I forget what a third bucket would be. But it was basically saying like, hey, these are the 3 skills that I know are relevant to the job to which I'm applying, and here is my military background translated to that. It was just one step further to spoon feed my background to their specific job requirement, and that I think is probably helpful.
Yeah, you make a really, really great point, and the functional will help many people who are working on a more professional level translate easier from military to civilian. So it's a great point. Because all of those things from leadership to, if you're doing logistics, if you're doing change management, if you're doing process improvement, employers don't necessarily care where that experience came from. It's not the first thing. It's that you have that experience and that functional knowledge that's important to them.
Yep.
Then the second step is to put that across. Okay, well, where did you get it? What size projects did you manage, et cetera? But great point.
And then if we're talking about resumes, the other side of that coin is cover letters. What is a cover letter, and does it even matter now?
Like I say, like resumes, lots of schools of thought, but I have been doing this for 20 years, and I can't remember that I've ever read a cover letter. And the reason I don't, it's not that they're not useful, and in some of the tech companies, they might help differentiate you from another candidate. But the first thing that military people have to get right is making sure that your resume, your application, and that you're qualified for that job. Because if you can't do that, it's the very first thing that recruiters look at is the resume, is your skill set, your qualifications, your time, your experience. If you're not qualified, then that cover letter's not going to make a difference. There are some people, though, as part of their hiring process that are a little bit more progressive. And they're looking at the cover letter for your writing style, for your personality, for your rationale of joining them. But when you look at the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of companies, let's just say in the United States alone, that's only a couple handfuls of companies, and you're not likely to run into it. So if you don't do a cover letter, most recruiters aren't even going to look at it. They're going to go to your resume, and if you look good, you're going forward.
What's just to give a sense, like how long does someone spend looking at a resume?
It depends on the quality of the recruiter, but generally recruiters will spend in the first 2 minutes of them scanning your resume, they're going to be looking for the things that jump out that match that job description. Whatever terminology that may, if you're looking for an accounting position, they're going to look for, have you been a tax accountant? Have you been, basic accounting or GAAP accounting? They're going to look right at that. And if they see it, then they will spend about 2 to 3 more minutes to start thinking of questions or areas of your experience they want to dig into. But the first, I would say 2 minutes max, they're determining, does that resume fit the job? They can see it very quickly. And if the answer is yes, then they will dig into the rest of it so that they're well prepared to call you or email you and take the process further.
And I think one of the nice things with resumes is the a lot of the work, it seems like, is done the first time you do this, and then afterwards you're updating it. But it is something that you probably spend, I don't know if hundreds of hours is too much of an exaggeration, but you spend a fair amount of time for. But the reason why is, it's getting such a cursory glance. 2 minutes is not a tremendous amount of time. So just really boiling this down to the essentials, making it very readable, making it very skimmable, that makes a big difference when you only get 120 seconds to catch someone's eye and proceed to that next level.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The example is, if you talk to anybody, Air Force, Marines, Army, Navy, Coast Guard, and if they had an opening in their particular unit and they were looking at somebody's rip sheet or their career sheet, whatever service, whatever title they're calling it now, the same person who would be filling a position in their unit is going to look about 2 minutes and say, let's talk to this person. So it's actually working both ways. So the idea is just that in a quick glance that you can show you're qualified, that your experience is relevant, so that they'll dig deeper.
That's great.
Oh, and by the way, while we're talking about that, just an extra tip, and this is a kind of a pet peeve of mine, but I found that it's a real warning sign, and I see a lot of people do it. They put an objective statement atop their resume. And my strong recommendation is that you do not put one of those. Because usually what happens is you're applying to multiple companies. And if that objective statement is the first thing a recruiter sees and it does not match the job to which you applied exactly, they will not go beyond that line. So I've started calling those an objection statement. You're giving somebody a reason to discard you with the first line forward. And that's just something you don't want to do. The recruiter will look right at what you're qualified to do. So don't put, your dream line up top there. If you're applying to the position, they assume that your objective is to get that job.
That's awesome. What about what advice do you have for listeners about when and how they should apply to jobs?
Like I said earlier, the big thing is first and foremost, over time, the number one way to get an interview and to get a job is employee referrals. So if you start building your LinkedIn connection network and you're connecting with veterans who've already transitioned and getting to know people, the best way for you to move forward in a process for any employment is having an employee refer you in their internal systems or hand your resume and information to a hiring manager for a specific position. That's, the absolute best way to get into a job, at least get to the interview stage. As far as applying, like I said, when you set up those alerts, you have to be ready to apply every day. If you're going to be in the job search, and this is what your objective is, then every morning, every evening, you need to spend 15, 20, 30 minutes, see what your alerts look like for jobs. Do those jobs interest you, and apply right there on the spot. It has to be an everyday thing. You don't know when that ideal job will hit. And if you have your resume loaded on your phone, if you have it on your laptop, and those alerts come through, you can apply immediately. Anytime you get into day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, your chances of being in the top 15 resumes that a recruiter screens diminish dramatically.
We're going to have to do a podcast interview at some point comparing everything you just said with online dating. There's probably some overlap there. You got to be active on these online dating sites. When someone's new to the site, you got to be able to pounce. There's probably some correlation.
You're so right. You're so funny. And actually, and the gentleman that you and I were talking about that's going to be on your podcast soon, I was talking to him about doing base visits and going out and doing in-person sessions for people that are transitioning, giving them the information in person, asking and answering their questions. And when I've done that in the past, oddly enough, I've told them it is strongly related to dating sites. Because the employer has to believe you, has to like you, and has to trust you. So when you're, and you have to make a good first impression, and you have to articulate what makes you special in a non-arrogant way, and in a confident way. And so if you can do those things on a dating site, or you can do those in your career search, they're going to work both sides of that equation.
I love it. What about, as we talk about all of this, I think of the recruiting firms, and what advice do you have for listeners about whether or not to engage with a recruiting firm?
So there's a number of them out there, and I've worked with, I would say, almost all of them. I think for veterans, it's a really good place to go and to start. But remember, and this is very critical for people to understand, you're going to talk to some good military recruiting firms out there. You're going to talk to some very good people who are very good at their craft, who really have a drive to help veterans. But make no mistake about it, the only way that company makes money is with their clients, paying the bills for finding the veterans. So their first interest, and it's not anything that should ever be looked at as bad, their first obligation is to the client in filling their positions. So you're probably going to get some good advice. You'll probably get presented to a few good companies, but you have to understand what their motivation is, what they're doing, and approach the job search appropriately. With that, it means if you want to work with one or two different military firms, it's perfectly fine. Remember, this is about you owning it. And so they're to represent their clients and bring good veterans forward. So it's perfectly fine to use a couple of those firms. When you do, if you're location specific, they're not going to put as much effort into you because their clients are across the United States, across the globe in many cases. So they're looking for candidates that are as open as possible to location, possibly narrowed down to maybe even a region like East Coast, West Coast, Pacific Northwest, Southwest, and people that are placeable, that have tangible skills. And also, those recruiters are looking for candidates who put the work into preparing to interview. They'll give you some of that, but remember, they're representing their clients, and they're putting their reputation on the line to represent you. So feel free to talk with any of those recruiting firms. If they ask you for exclusivity, then I would run away. If they ask you for money, absolutely run away, because what they do should not cost you a thing. And you should, in your first introductory call, if you have a good feeling of trust and you've seen some of their client companies or seen some of their openings, I think it's pretty easy for you to determine if there's somebody that you want to work with to further your career.
And it seems like from the other interviews I've done, some of the advantages of working with a recruiter is you get a lot of experience quickly. And so some firms will have a day where you go and you interview, call it 10 to 20 times. And so you get a lot of practice right away, and that can be really helpful. But I always do. I don't have direct experience working with a recruiter. I always like to point out the maybe flawed analogy, but it's kind of like a real estate agent where they get paid based off of the house selling. And so if a real estate agent is really smart, they're going to place as many people in as many homes as quickly as possible. And of course, they want you to be happy. Of course, you want them to find the dream home. But when it comes down to it, they want to make that happen as quickly as possible. And, the difference to them and the house price being plus or minus $10,000 is not big when it comes to their commission. Same thing for your salary. So it's just, it's misaligned interests. They're not perfectly aligned with your interests, and that doesn't make it bad or anything at all. But it's just, I worry sometimes that people coming straight out of the military, they have such a team-centric attitude that it's like they want to do what's best for everyone. And I think it's much more advantageous to be able to walk into a situation like that, clearly knowing what you want and advocating for yourself and putting your desires and needs first in terms of only taking the job that's exactly right for you and your family, and not relying on that recruiter to do that for you. That's not necessarily their job.
I think that's exceptional advice, and I couldn't frame it any better than you just did. It is very much like a real estate agent, and it helps. And I've told tens of thousands of veterans this. Before you start working with a recruiter, understand what it is you want.
Yep.
Because if you don't, they're going to make some opportunities in some locations look far, far better than they really are based on your interests. And the other thing I would add is that, do take a look at those opportunities and understand you're not going to get your ideal job out of the military. If you do, congratulations, you'll be somebody I've never met before. However, if you're getting into an industry, remember this is your next journey. Wherever you are in the military, you didn't start in that position. You had to start somewhere and work your way up. And that's the way it is in corporate America. Find a place, find an industry, find a company that's going to give you the experience or the growth opportunities. And if you can get in the door, then it's about your performance.
I love that, and I hope that listeners take that as just managing expectations. And the thing that I always think of, so I went from submarines, I went to business school at Stanford, and then went into entrepreneurship. And the thing that I think of is, all of my classmates and I, we worked our butts off to write compelling applications that said we knew what we wanted to do after business school. And then as soon as we got in, all of us switched it. We're like, well, that wasn't right. And we worked to find the right summer internship. And most of the people I know came back from their summer internship after all that work and were like, that's definitely not what I want to do. So we worked our butts off our second year to figure out what we wanted to do when we graduated. And then we got that job. And so many people within a year switched jobs. And now I'm, almost 10 years out from grad school, and people are on their third or fifth or seventh job. And a lot of people are still trying to figure out what they want to do or what their ideal career is. So don't approach this as something where you're going to get out of the military, you're going to find that dream job, and you're going to stay there for 30 years. I think that you learn a lot about yourself, and you learn a lot about what you have to offer and what you want to do. And so just approach this as the first job of many, and I don't mean that to discourage listeners, but just to say don't put so much pressure on yourself to think that you have to just really nail this first job. You have to knock it out of the park. No, this is a process, like a career-long process of figuring out what you want to do, and of course put your best foot forward. But I like what George is saying because it makes me think like just take a little bit of that pressure off. Don't feel like this is the last job you're ever going to take.
Yeah, and I've joked with people for years. I am the global head of recruiting for a cybersecurity company and a former Army officer. If you look at my resume and where I jumped in, and I jumped into a couple different things, but I got into consulting thinking it was sexy and cool wearing a suit and giving advice, and I had delusions of grandeur when I was doing it. And the funny thing was when I was at this consulting firm, it gave me the opportunity to move into HR. And I never, ever would have suspected that was what was going to drive me from being Army enlisted, then an Army officer and a company commander. And then I realized and made the connection that selecting and training and finding good leaders was what was driving me. So HR, resource management, leading recruiting teams. And in very short order, with my leadership background, companies kept giving me more responsibility about being a recruiter. So recruiting manager, regional manager, and the next thing you know, I've led teams of recruiters north of 300 and hired over 20,000 in 1 year. And if I were to look back when I exited the military, recruiting, I don't even think I couldn't have found it in the dictionary as far as a career is concerned. And I couldn't be happier with where I've landed and what I'm doing. So it was just getting into a good company, and then the next thing you know, I'm finding things that, wow, this really drives me forward, and I want to take my career in this direction. So it was great.
Awesome. Well, George, what else do you want to make sure listeners know before we wrap up?
The big thing is making sure that you spend time preparing. And, you and I talked about top interviewing questions. Why are you leaving the military? A couple things that I really want people to understand is it's not how much you know about that job. It's really how much you know about yourself. And can you articulate what makes you great, what makes you different, how you're self-improving, how you've helped others improve, how you've advanced other people's careers, how you lead, how you manage. People in the military kind of take that for granted, like in many cases it's muscle memory. If you're going to make the decision to enter corporate, if you decide to stay in the military, wonderful. We need great people to stay in the military. If you decide to get out, that year point, 18 months to a year, you need to start investing in yourself, looking at interviewing books, start taking a personal inventory and preparing yourself, knowing your accomplishments, knowing what makes you great, and then start to practice how to articulate that. Because job interviews, I promise you, are very, very stressful. As much as I try to make people comfortable, they're always stressful. You have the weight of the world on your shoulders that you put there yourself, your family puts there. And every candidate that I've seen that knows themselves well and knows what makes them successful, they hammer interviews. It's just like a conversation that they sail through. The difference between somebody who's prepared and somebody who thinks they can wing it or has not prepared is like the Wizard of Oz and Dorothy in Kansas going to, the great land of Oz. It's such a stark difference. And so the people who prepare, the people who work hard, the people that know themselves and practice articulating that in a succinct and impactful way are the people that companies are going to fight after and fight to get onto their company. So I can never say enough, practice, 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 practice.
Awesome. Well, George, I appreciate your time again on this. For listeners,
Sure.
George and I chatted before we started recording, and he is busy is an understatement that is severely an understatement. And so taking your time out of the day, we're connecting on a Sunday morning to be able to fit this into George's and my schedule, and just appreciate the quality of your advice and for making time to connect with us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing, and my best wishes to everybody out there who's listening. I do hope your transition is a successful one, but it's a great journey. You'll enjoy it, and thank you so much for giving me this time and the time to. Service.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Uniform. There are over 200 free episodes at beyondtheuniform.io. They're classified by the industry of focus, the functional role the person plays, and more. Beyond the Uniform is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Justin Asiri. Our Director of Outreach, responsible for sponsorship and guest episodes, is Steve Bain. Our editor, responsible for the show notes and text transcripts for all episodes, is Kathleen Dillon. Our data analytics and insights advisor is Andrew Woolridge. If you are enjoying Beyond the Uniform, you can help us out by telling your veterans and friends in the military about this free resource. There is more information on the website about how you can sponsor an episode or donate to our program to help us grow the work that we're doing. Be sure to check out the coaching section of beyondtheuniform.io, where you can be paired with professional, subsidized coaches to help you figure out your next career move. You can sign up for our newsletter to be up to date on the latest happenings at Beyond the Uniform. And in each show notes section, there is a link to audible.com, which is providing a free audiobook of your choice to Beyond the Uniform listeners. You get a free book of your choosing, and Beyond the Uniform gets $15 to subsidize the cost of the show, regardless of whether you continue with audible.com or not. Check that out and more in the show notes for this episode. Keep the feedback coming. Let me know what resources would help you in your career, and we'll do our best to make that happen. Take care, be safe, and I'll be back next week with more interviews with military veterans about their civilian career.